Anyone that says that halacha is dry, there's no lamdis in halacha, obviously he's not learning halacha properly. But in this sugya, even if you would not learn it properly, you would right away see the gishmak lamdis, the gishmak sugya, all the way to the halacha l'maisa, based on the lamdis. Imagine somebody's going to ask you, no, what are you learning? You're learning halacha now. You're going to tell them, halacha, today there was a Rav Shach and Avi Yezri, or B'kiva Eger, Mamish, the Gresta Sugya, the Gresta Lamdis. Let's try Bez Hashem today to try to come from the Lamdis to the halacha l'maisa in very practical cases. I get this shaila, I can't say once a week, but bivada you get it once in 2 weeks, once in 3 weeks, for sure you get the shaila that somebody, they by mistake, they didn't put inside, they didn't put the sheka, the plug, they didn't put inside the socket, they forgot to plug in the hot plate. Another case, they decided to put the hot plate on a Shabbos clock, so that way after the meal, it won't be hot in the house. I don't mean the shaila about a Shabbos clock, about things going on and having the food on. I mean, once they'll finish their cholent, the Shabbos clock should go off. So I had a maisa, mamish last Shabbos. That's why I thought of the oilam. Somebody put his Shabbos clock on, and it was supposed to go off at 11 o'clock. The only thing is, it was supposed to go off at 11 o'clock a.m. Now, for the American oilam, it's a little bit hard to understand that. But this chevra over here, that they daven very early, very, very early. And Memela, they'll daven Shachris, they'll be done with Shachris at about 9:30. And the fellow's already finished his cholent by 10:45, by 11 o'clock. So he said his Shabbos clock, that the Shabbos clock should go off on the hot plate at 11 a.m. The problem was that he accidentally set it for 11 p.m. And Memela, the Shabbos clock went off at 11 p.m. at night, and somebody chapped it. He went over to the cholent. It was after the meal on Friday night, and he went over to the cholent to see what's going on. And then he realized that the hot plate is not hot. The cholent was still hot, but the hot plate was not hot. And he realized his mistake, that the that the Shabbos clock had been set incorrectly for 11 p.m. and not for 11 a.m. And they came knocking on my door at about 12 p.m. They came knocking on my door, and they want to know what to do with the cholent. Cholent biyodai, oidai biyodai. They want to know now, what do we do with the cholent? Can we go and put the cholent on somebody else's hot plate or something, etc.? Are there any eitzes? Another shaila, sometimes you put the blech on, and it's a small flame. And when you're monkeying with the blech, sometimes it can make it that the fire can go out. Sometimes that fire goes out before Shabbos. Sometimes the fire can go out on Shabbos. And then people have the shaila about the gas. Are you allowed to turn the gas? Because that's muksa. Okay, so that maybe we could be turning the gas off with a shinoi because there's no fire at this point. So now you just want to turn off, assuming that's your mitzias, but then all that's coming out is gas, and that's dangerous. So with a shinoi, you take your elbows and you'll close the gas. But Lamaisa, now he's got a problem. He doesn't have fire. So what do we do in all of these cases? What do we do in all these cases? What's the shaila? The shaila is that he wants to put it, let's say, on my hot plate, which by saying in the story, we'll see that was the end result, is that he wants to put it on my hot plate. And I have plenty of room in the hot plate because my cholent's on a crock pot. And my hot plate was only for the food for Friday night. So he wants to know, can I take my cholent and put it on your hot plate? So we need a bunch of tnayim when it comes to chazara. Obviously, the tnai, which is not the chazara tnai, which is bishul, is we have to make sure that the cholent is mevushal kol zercha. If the cholent is not fully cooked, it's a non-starter. Game over. Obviously, if the cholent is not fully cooked, when you're going to put it onto the fire, you're going to be the one that's causing it to cook now. So that's for sure, no question. This cholent was fully cooked. The shaila is that I need other tnayim. What were the other tnayim? Last week we discussed gruf of a ketuma. So gruf of a ketuma, we don't have. Actually, we have, because we're going to put it on my hot plate. My hot plate is gruf of ketuma. And is this cholent a chazara or is it nesina l'chatchila? It's a chazara. It was on a fire when Shabbos came in. And now it's going to a covered fire, a hot plate in halacha, for whatever reason. Maybe we'll have to talk about, perhaps maybe even this time, maybe next time. But that's also called something that you can't change and you can't be machate, and it's not a normal way of cooking. So therefore a hot plate. And is considered for all intents and purposes group of ketuma. So I have bishul, and I have garifikatin. So what else do I need? Well, I need l'chayra, one of the other two t'nayim. We mentioned, of course, you need l'chatchila, two t'nayim. You need oida b'yadai and daita l'achzer. And l'chatchila, you're supposed to have both. B'di'evet, this will be a b'di'evet case. If we have one of the t'nayim of, let's say, oida b'yadai or daita l'achzer, then that'll be enough. So l'chayra, what do we have in our case? The item yesterday, my understanding is learned the sugya of oida b'yadai. This case, l'chayra, is not oida b'yadai. So now we have the garuf of a ketuma. We have, it's fully cooked. We don't have oida b'yadai because he's not holding the cholent. The cholent's on a fire and he's not holding it. The whole t'nai of oida b'yadai is it's in his hands and we see it as a hemshich of going back to a fire. Over here, the fire's gone off. And he wasn't holding it at the time when the fire went off. So we don't have oida b'yadai, but all is not lost. Maybe we have daita l'achzir. Now this sounds like a medrash pliya. What do you mean do we have daita l'achzir? We don't have daita l'achzir. In our case over here, the fire went off and he didn't even know about the fire until 12 o'clock at night. By the time he had gotten to the cholent was still hot. Agav, if the cholent wouldn't be hot, then we'd have a problem with bishul. We might have a problem, we said, of the Mogen Avram, that it has to still be warm, at least hot, something, because otherwise it looks like even Mexican and Vashel. It looks like you're doing a cooking if you're taking something cold and making it hot. But over here, that wasn't the case. A cholent stays ganz hot. Kanira, the hot plate took time to cool off, and Kanira, the cholent was boiling hot. By the time that they realized the problem at about 12 o'clock, they knocked on my door at about 12 o'clock, which means they realized the problem at about 11:50. When they realized the problem at 11:50, it was still hot. So we have mavushal kol tzarcha, we have still hot. We have a blech that we can go to, my house, in the hot plate, and they want to know, can they take it and put it? What do we not have? We don't have oida b'yadai. So today, what we're going to have to do is, what's the t'nai of daita l'achzir? Maybe we have daita l'achzir. What do you mean daita l'achzir? I didn't know about it. How could you say I have das to return it when I didn't know it went off? On the chayra, that's the pashtus. The pashtus is, mali if when I take off the cholent from the fire, mali if I take the fire away from the cholent. In both cases, it's certainly not a positive das to be machzer it to the fire. Excuse me. This was the shaila. This is the shaila. And the chayra, we have to have the whole t'nai, the whole idea of chazara, the whole idea of the t'nayim of chazara, is that we have to have a hemshich of the previous ma'aseh. So here, Be'ishlam, on the case of where I have das to put it back, so then we say he has das to return it, and therefore we always see it as going back to the fire. It doesn't have to go back to this fire, it can go to a different fire as long as it's a group of a ketuma. But it's a hemshich, it's continuation. We don't see this as a new action. It's not mechzik and mavashim. Mashayin over here, just like you'd understand, if I took it off the gamre and I put it on the karka, so l'chayra, the hot plate has become the karka. I certainly don't have oida b'yadai, and I don't have any das because I didn't know about it. So l'chayra, it should be a major problem, and its shalom should be aser because we know the Mishnah Berurah told us that if you have both t'nayim, that's great. If you have one of the t'nayim, b'di'evet, okay. But if you have neither of the t'nayim, so l'chayra, it should be a problem. And that's l'chayra, the shaila that we have to discuss. What's the din of daita l'achzir? Now, you could clear a shaila, but at first glance, it would seem like it's not really such a shaila. We could clear, what does it mean when Chazal gave a t'nai of daita l'achzir? One of the t'nai chazara is that you have to have das to return it to the fire. What does it mean that you have to have das to return it to the fire? You could learn, it means you have to have a positive das to be returning it. And the lumdis is like we said, push it. You have to, when you take it off, we want a continuous connection to the fire. How do I do a continuous connection to the fire? One way is in your hand, and one way is through your das. As long as you have one of them that continuously connects it to the fire. But if you have no das, so then that's just as bad as having das to remove, because you don't have something positively connecting it back to the fire. That would certainly be the pashtus, and that's what's mashma in the lashon of Chazal. Constantly they say daita l'achzir. You need a positive das to be returning it to the fire. If that would be the case, in our case, you certainly don't have a positive das to be returning it to the fire. But maybe you can learn a different side. Maybe over here, daita l'achzir doesn't mean like we're saying positive das. Maybe daita l'achzir means that the t'nai of chazara is don't mess things up. Daita l'achzir is the extreme of that. In other words, what you're supposed to be doing is having das to return. Usually it's either or. You're supposed to be having das to return. Don't what? Don't have das removal. So how did Chazal say don't have das removal? They said Taital Achsir. Now, usually there's no nafkamina, therefore Chazal have a right to speak like that. And you have to have the das to return. What was the problem of Chazal? The problem of Chazal is we don't want to have das removal. Das removal of the cholent that you're not putting it back, that takes away the hemsheich, the continuation, that makes it look like a new bishul process. That looks like a Mexican mevashel. Hooray, you removed it from the fire. You broke the connection to the fire. Normally, when Chazal said Daitel Achsir, that would say you have to have positive das, but you don't really need the positive das. Just don't mess things up. Don't have das to remove it. What's an afkamina? If I say I need positive das, or Chazal say, no, you don't need positive das returning it. You just can't have a das of removal. So the answer is very simple. The answer will be mamish all of our cases. What happens if you have a situation where I don't have a das of removal? So I don't have a positive das to put it back on the fire, but I didn't do a maisa with my das to take it off. So therefore, I'm connected to the fire. When are you not connected to a fire? You're not connected to a fire when your das was to remove it from the fire. But let's say my das was not to remove it from the fire. For example, in the case that we discussed, the cholent was on, it was supposed to be there till 11 tomorrow, and the Shabbos clock went off. Do I have das removal? Certainly not. I don't have positive das to return it to the fire, but I don't have das to be masalik. So memela, if you learn that the lumdus is you need a positive das, you don't have it in the cholent, is going to be a problem. Mash ain't if you learn that the problem is that when you had das to remove the cholent, that was menatig, that cut it off from the connection to the fire. So then in our case, I don't have das removal. It lemaisa, I think most of us would never have cleared such a shaila, because I think most of us would have just looked in the lashon of the Gemara, lashon of the Shraga, and we won't learn it lav dafka. We'd say that if Chazal said you need a das lachser, it means you have to have a positive das to return it, which is why most of us probably would have said that l'chayra, you have to have positive das. In our case, it's not positive das. In Mamela, we have a problem with this cholent. We'll have to come up with some type of other eitzah, but we'd have a problem with this cholent because you don't have a positive das returning it to the fire. However, the Sefer Az Nidbru, that's where Benjamin Zilber, is a great tzaddik, a great goyin. He brings from no less than Rebbe Kiva Eger a raya that Rebbe Kiva Eger held like that mechudesh tzad. And if you have a Rebbe Kiva Eger, I always say, you can be saying Rebbe Kiva Eger, bein b'shas etzchak, bein shaloi b'shas etzchak, goyin Rebbe Kiva Eger. So if you have Rebbe Kiva Eger, he learns in a Rebbe Kiva Eger that Rebbe Kiva Eger was obviously going with the tzad, that the problem is das removal, and that you do not need a positive das to bring it back. And it's only a problem if you had your das to take it off the cholent, which Mimela in our case, where it wasn't taken off the cholent, and it just happens not to be on a fire anymore, but nobody removed it from the fire. So there was no das that was removing it. So then we would still be able to perhaps put it on another fire. What's his raya from Rebbe Kiva Eger? Now this Rebbe Kiva Eger is brought in the Bir Halacha, and the Bir Halacha, Rebbe Kiva Eger is brought in some of the Shulchan Aruch. Today it's in all of the B'darka, the Shulchan Aruch all have it. The old Shulchan Aruch, my old Shulchan Aruch, I saw it wasn't there. But nonetheless, it's in the Rebbe Kiva Eger, it's in the Bir Halacha, brings it. And he has an interesting shaila, which means Hashem, that shaila of Rebbe Kiva Eger we're also going to talk about soon. Rebbe Kiva Eger says he's site. So Rebbe Kiva Eger, what happens if somebody comes, takes my cholent and puts it on the floor? Until now, we were talking about biyadai, not biyadai, not das, yedas. Floor, karka, is a total siluk. Karka means it's in the fridge, it's done, and that's clearly a Mexican mevashel when you take it from the floor and put it back onto the hot plate. Last time we spoke about a potential that if my hand is on it, maybe that's not called floor. But if something is put on the floor, whatever the floor, let's say fridge, the modern day fridge. Let's say someone comes over to your cholent and he's really angry at you and he takes your cholent and he puts it inside the fridge. So Claire to Rebbe Kiva Eger, because this guy asked him, my cholent, okay, what are you doing? I see the guy running to the fridge, he's taking the cholent, no cholent tonight. So now, after I deal with him, can I take my cholent and put it back on the fire? My fire has a hot plate. I got it's a mavashal called sarchai. It's still hot. I chopped it in the fridge when it was still hot. Can I go and take it and put it on the hot plate? Says Rebbe Kiva Eger, l'chayra, is this going to be tali in the regular shaila of ein adam oiser davar she'eina shalai? Over here, you can't ask in my cholent. You just took my cholent. It's my cholent. You can't ask my cholent. Says Rebbe Kiva Eger, no. The klal of ein adam oiser davar she'eina shalai does not apply when you do a maisa. You can't say, Ein adam moisa davar shenish loy, take a piece of chazer, throw it in my cholent. And say, oh, Ein adam moisa davar shenish loy, and take it out. I don't know. Don't eat the chazer. The bliyas have gone in. But no. He has no right to ask in my cholent. Shkoyach. Tadala. The cholent is treif. Ein adam moisa davar shenish loy is a machshava. Your machshava, your das is not going to be poil over here in my item. You can't have a das on my item to make my item truma and this and that. You can't make a neder on my item. Says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, taking the cholent and putting it on the floor is tantamount to a maisa, because karka is menutik in ganzen from the fire, and karka is considered a maisa that has uprooted it from the fire. And therefore, once you've done such a thing, that's it, game over. There's no way. You took the cholent and you made a mitzias of when I'll take it from the floor, from the fridge, and put it onto the fire, it's going to be a mersik of it looks like cooking. Therefore, says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, that I don't have a shaila. Says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, b'nistapakti. My shaila, says the guy in Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and he says his shaila is based on a machlekes rishonim. My shaila, says the guy in Rabbi Akiva Eiger, is what if somebody took off your cholent and he didn't put it on the karka? He's just holding it in his hand, but he had das that he's removing the cholent and he's not putting it back. Now, as far as a maisa is concerned, it's not that level of maisa of where you put a chazer inside and you trafed it up, or you put it in the fridge, and now the tsura is a tsura smachzik mavasha. Elamai, says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, but he has a machshava of removing your cholent from the fire. Says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, l'ch'oira, we should say on this that it's in his hand, it's out of the other, and your das is worthless. Your das is, this cholent is not going back. Who are you? Says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, it should come out that if somebody goes over to my cholent, takes off the cholent, has no das to return the cholent. So then, and then I look at it, I say, what are you doing? What are you doing? He goes, I want cholent. What are you doing? Take the cholent, give me that cholent, and I take it. Says Rabbi Akiva Eiger, I should be allowed to take it and put it back as long as it's a covered flame. Why? Because your machshav is batal, because ain't nothing voice of Sheni Shalai. Says the guy in Rabbi Akiva Eiger, but I'm not sure. Because there's a machlekes rishonim, which isn't to the Ger Sugi, but I'll mention it, that even though we say ain't nothing voice of Sheni Shalai, that's only when it's called kulaya machshava. But if it's a machshava that's together with an action, which is our case, he's not only thinking I'm taking it off, but he did something to enhance the, to show he's not going to put it back. So maybe then we don't say Ein Adam Moiseh Davar Sheni Shalai. In other words, there's three levels. There's a level of a machshava, then for sure Ein Adam Moiseh Davar Sheni Shalai. There's a level of where you did something to it and you push it, you put it on the floor, in our case. And then Avada is some Oyser Adam Davar Sheni Shalai. Then there's a middle case, which Rabbi Akiva Eiger learns is a machlekes rishonim. And therefore Rabbi Akiva Eiger says he's not sure about this case. Rabbi Akiva Eiger ends with the words that it's a machlekes, and Tosfos will hold this is yes considered Ein Adam Moiseh Davar Sheni Shalai. The Rash would say not like that, and he blibes with a shaila, that this remains a shaila. Okay, if it's a shaila on a Rabbanan, there'd be a makom to be mekel, especially Tzarech Shabbos to be a makom to be mekel. Comes again as Nidbru and Rav Shach Zecher Tzadik Levracha in Perek Gimel in Halacha Yud, and they say, from this Rabbi Akiva Eiger, we have a raya to the Yisai that we've been discussing, the Chakita. If you learn, Zakti as Nidbru, that the lumdis of, and you'll see why I'm mentioning Az Nidbru in a moment, we'll get to Rav Shach. But if you're going to say that the lumdis is that daitalax, there means I need a positive das to return the cholent. And if I don't have a positive das to return the cholent, so then it's no good. Then that's considered that you removed it and it's gone. So then over here, what's it going to help the sugya of Ein Adam Moiseh Davar Sheni Shalai? 100%. Ein Adam Moiseh Davar Sheni Shalai. And really, this guy has no das. His das is batal. We don't care about you. And even though you're the Maisa, we'll go with us Rishonim. You took my cholent off. You had das not to return it. You're batal. Don't look at my cholent. Your das is not chal. Gavaldik. His das isn't chal. But Rabbi Isai typically that even if it fell off on its own, if we're going to learn that the lumdis is you need a positive das to return it, nobody had a positive das to return it. If you learn that lumdis is that daital achse means when you have das to remove, that's the problem. Daital l'salek is the problem. So then in our case, Rabbi Akiva Eiger is gevaldik. This guy's das Do we reckon with the second guy, the guy who took off the cholent, and he's not the bailim? So that's totally in Eina the Moisa Davar Shinish Loy with the Maisa, because your das is batal. Do I say your das is batal? Your das is to remove it. You did that das removal. So if I say Eina the Moisa Davar Shinish Loy, so your das is batal. And I don't need something positively taking it back. I just need don't mess up and have a das removal. Your das of removal is not a das. So therefore your das is batal. Masha Enkein, if you learn Odom Oyser Davar Shinish Loy in this type of a case, so then this fellow who had das removal, his das will be chal, and he removed it. But this is all going, says the Ad Nidbaru, with the premise that obviously Rebbe Kiva Eger learned that the t'nai of Daita La'achzir is das removal is the problem. Because if you would learn that Daita La'achzir is a positive thing, that I always require a positive das to put it back, and if not, it's usher. So then in our case, say all the Eina the Ma'isa Davar Shenish Shalais in the world, but you certainly don't have a Daita La'achzir putting it back on the fire. Nobody's having das to put it back. You're right. His das is batal. So his removal das is not chashiv, gewaldig, but nobody had das to put it back. Because the original Bailim certainly didn't even have das to put it back. And this person is having das removal. So then the Mela, it's muchach and goyin Rebbe Kiva Eger, the tzad and the chakira, that the lomdis of daita lahachzir is that you have even a daitoi of removal and does a genuk shoin to cause the problem. And you don't need a daitoi lahachzir in order to create the problem. Oh, what's nafkamina? Says that Nibru. Okay, so now we have Rebbe Kiva Eger, and you go back to all of our cases. What was the case? The 11 o'clock at night, the cholent, the fire went off. So if the lumdus would have been, you need a positive das lahachzir, we don't have it. But now the Rebbe Kiva Eger is telling us that what's the lumdus of daita lahachzir? The lumdus of daita lahachzir is das removal is the shter. So then over here, nobody had a das removal. So over here, it'll come out of kula. And they'll come out, they'll be able to put their cholent on my fire. Because now you don't have biyadai, it's true, but it's mevushal, it's going to garfa kotim, it's coming from a fire, and it's called daitai lahachzir. How's it called daitai lahachzir? Because it was not a daitai l'salik. That's how that's Nibru learns, and he talks paskins like that, based on the suffix Rebbe Kiva Eger. But Rabbi Isai, comes again, Rabbeinu Agadol, the Rosh Hashiva Zeichet Tzadik Levracha, and the Rosh Hashiva from Klal Yisrael, Rav Shach, Zeichet Tzadik Levracha. And he goes over here in a most brilliant shtickle in Perek Gimel Halacha Yud. He brings out Goyin Rebbe Kiva Eger v'tzarech li'iyim b'dvarav, and he writes such sharper words on the Goyin Rebbe Kiva Eger. He says it's pashut that this can't be. Rebbe Kiva Eger's entire shtickle is based on the premise. How could you be toila adam oised of shinish lor na? It's all based on the premise that the lumdus of daita lahachzir is das of removal is the problem. He says that's not the pshat in the Tanai. Go read the words of the Gemara. The Gemara says daita lahachzir. He says it's pashut that over here there is no hemshech if you don't have a positive das to return it to the fire. Misvara pshuta. It's a problem if you remove it. So if there a comment you don't have something positive bringing you back to the fire, so then that itself shows no hemsheichias, no continuation to the fire. So then who cares, says Rav Shach, if it fell off on its own, even if the fire fell off, even if the cholent fell off on its own, but nobody had das to remove it. But so if you don't have something positively connecting it back. And the Tnoi Chazar are, it looks like Bishul, so this looks like Bishul. And Rebbe Kiva Eger, says Rav Shach, is not just a pella from the Loshin and from Svara, but we find in Hilchos Tzitzis a similar concept. In Hilchos Tzitzis says the Goyin Rav Shach, when a person's wearing a talis, so it's basically the same types of halachas. The halachas of talis are, it's not so known, but a person, he puts on one talis, he takes off that talis for Friday afternoon, he wants to put on his Shabbos tzitzis, he takes off his tzitzis, he puts on his Shabbos tzitzis. Shabbos tzitzis, you have to make a new bracha. The bracha from before has nothing to do with that tzitzis. Okay, that's a different pair of tzitzis, everyone knows that. Let's say I take off my talis, and then, I decide I want to feel very heilig and I want to learn with my talis, and I put back on my talis. Pashut, you have to make another bracha. Okay. What happens now? I take off my talis and I plan on putting it back. I'm just going to be excused. I take off my talis and I plan on putting it back. So that we know that you don't make a new bracha. You should know that's a big fight. Some hold you do make a new bracha. We paskin you don't make a new bracha. Why don't we make a new bracha? It says the Mishabura in the Paiskin. Because since you knew you're putting it back on, so you're continuing the original bracha, the original talis wearing. But says the Shulchan Aruch, what happens if the talis is eingefallen? Sometimes you see that chassan, and he just, but he just got his talus for the first time. He's putting on his talus the day after the chasana. He's got his hands in the air and he's thanking the Heilige Bashefer for his shver for sure, and for the shviga zicher. And he's got his hair there, and you see the poor guy, and the talus is on the floor, and sometimes even the Yom donuts. And he's, when they told him in the store, it's a non-slip talus. So the Shulchan Aruch says that in such a case, you'd have to make another bracha on the talus. We'll see in a minute. Maybe some have a kula because if he's wearing tzitzis or whatever. But let's say an easy case, he's not wearing tzitzis and his talus fell. The halacha is you need a new bracha. And this is the same halacha by mezuzah. If a person takes off a mezuzah, just wants to check it or whatever, okay, checking is a tickle shayla, might find a puzzle, but certainly if he takes it off to fix the area and he puts it right back, no new bracha. But if it fell on its own, so then you need a new bracha. What's the lamdas? The lamdas is pashit. If it fell, so then the old bracha is gone. You need to continue with the original matzah. My bracha went, calls man, it's up. If I positively took it off and I had das, I'm going to put it back. I continued the matzah with my das. But if you don't have a positive das, putting it back, so then it's gone. You don't have something that the original mitzias, the original talus wearing is gone. The original mezuzah is gone. So, says the Goyin of Shach, that's why in Hilchos Tzitzis, if a person takes off his talus and he has das to put it back, he has positive das, so then the positive das continues and keeps the dream alive. So too by mezuzah. But if you didn't have any das, so then there's nothing continuing. You need a positive das to put it back. Memela says the Goyin of Shach, it's the exact same thing when it comes to, it's not like a weird zushtel, it's a gewaldige zushtel. It's the exact same thing when it comes to the sugi of chazara. What is going to keep it that I still see a connection to the fire? My das, that's a chiddush, that you're already it's off the fire. Why don't we say it's off and it's mechsi? The third is my das. Maybe especially if you learn that the mechsi is going on the person himself. Does he feel like he's doing a bishul? He doesn't, because his das is connecting that he plans on putting it back. But masha ein kain, if he didn't have das, even though he didn't have positive das to remove it, but he doesn't have positive das to put it back. So then I says the Goyin of Shach, that this is a pella, because the Tanai of Dait L'Achzir requires a positive das, L'Achzir. And thus says Rav Shach, the Goyin Rebbe Kiva Eger is mamish a tzarech iyin. And he says, the end of the words, he says, the Lashon, I'll read you his Lashon. He says, Lu Pashit. What I'm saying is Pashit. He says there's no shaila, just like when the talus falls off. If the cholent falls off and nobody had positive das to put it back, or just like in our case, if the fire went off and nobody had positive das to be putting it back, he says it's pashit, that it's no good. And timoni on the Goyin Rebbe Kiva Eger should not to be said. He doesn't understand Rebbe Kiva Eger. So what comes out, Rabbi say? It comes out, you go back to our cases, and in all of our cases, it should be that the case is not going to be called Dait L'Achzir, because in our cases, nobody had a positive das because the fire went out on its own. Either he forgot to plug it in, or it went off on its own, the Shabbos clock that we spoke about, or he was monkeying with the blech, and the mail of the fire went out, and now the fire went off. So in the case of where the fire went off, he certainly does. And it takes a case where if the blech would still be mamash yatzaletis by yeshladin, maybe it's still called on the fire. But let's say the blech went off, he didn't realize it until later. He started smelling the gas, and we said you could turn off the gas with at least with a shinoi, assuming there's no fire, whatever. The kitzer, so the kai govna, it should come out that he doesn't have a positive das la'achzer in all of our cases, and it should come out of machlekes Rebbe Kiva Eger and Rav Shach. No, what's the psak when you have machlekes Rebbe Kiva Eger and Rav Shach? So what would you think? So the stama Rebbe Kiva Eger, no? It's machlekes and halacha Rebbe Kiva Eger and Rav Shach, stama Rebbe Kiva Eger. Or do you say no? Rav Shach had Rebbe Kiva Eger open on the page. So, he knew Rebbe Kiva Eger and he argues Rebbe Kiva Eger. And I'll tell you more. Somebody once asked Rav Shach halacha shayla, and Rav Shach said, "Was bin ich a Paisik? Was bin ich a Paisik?" So he said, "Geitzer Rav Osner." The Chazon Ish said already when Rav Osner was 42 years old, they asked him the shaylas. So there was a bacher in the room at the time. I heard the story from the bacher. There's a bacher in this room, and now he's a big yeshiva. So he said to Rav Shach, "What, Rav Shiva never learned, Shulchan Aruch?" The person came in at the Shaila and Halacha, and gave him Shach said, "What's been a place? Go to ask Rav Osner." So what, Rav Shiva doesn't know from Shulchan Aruch? So he answered him, it's like in an Agav Azah. He said, "Yeah, Rav Shach, when he was in the Ezra's Nashim, between the wars, in the First World War, so it's Yadua that Rav Shach chazered Shas 40 times in the Ezra's Nashim in those 4 years. Yadua. one shirt that he washed for Shabbos under the radiator, and the Amana that had the schluss that she brought him food, and he chazard shas 40 times. I don't know, be in, not be in, but whatever it is, it's a lot. And over there, he said, yeah, it's at the end, and it was like in 1917. The war was ending, and he knew he was going to have to get some type of a shtella, some type of parnasa. So his uncle, Rav Zalman, had told him that before he gets to shtella, he must learn Shulchan Aruch. So he learned the Shulchan Aruch, 3-4 times, but he doesn't chazer. It doesn't chazer 3-4 times. So I made a cheshbon. We made the cheshbon together in the story. That means that Rav Shach learned, if you do the cheshbon from when the story occurred till when Rav Shach left, Rav Shach learned 50 simonim a day in order to chazer the whole Sefer Shulchan Aruch 3 times, 4 times, whatever. So 50 simonim. So everybody said he doesn't chazer. So I don't know. So who do we pass him like? Rabbi Akiva Eiger or Rav Shach? So you know what the answer to the question is? Question? Let me just finish this part. So the answer is like this. The answer is that they asked this question to Rav Shach. They asked this question. Sorry?
I want to interrupt for a second because everybody's asking the question about the talus. So can the Rav address the raya for the talus? The Chayr Rav Shach is a good raya, no?
No, we're not even close to done yet, Rabbi Say. Have I ever let you guys down? Hey, Rabbi Say. Never let you guys down. We're getting the bad Hashem. But don't you want to hear Gavaldik Gemaisa?
Rabbi Akiva Eiger also knew.
Rabbi Akiva Eiger know Hilchos Tefillah and Tzitzis. It's a raya brua. It's a raya brua. It's a raya brua from Tzitzis. Pele Gemaisa. So they asked Rav Shach this kasha, and Rav Shach they asked we'll see in a minute what maybe was the shaila they asked Rav Shach, but they asked Rav Shach this shaila basically. We'll give a case in a moment, but they asked Rav Shach a certain shaila which was sort of related to this, and they asked it: should we do Lemaisa put back the chalent? Put back the chalent. According to Rav Akiva Eiger, it's motor. According to Rav Shach, it doesn't. So Rav Shach said, "Of course you could put back the chalent." So I said, "What do you mean? How could you put that chalent? You write that Rav Akiva Eiger is a pella." He said, "Rav Akiva Eiger is a pella, but of course Rav Akiva Eiger is the paisik." I know. What do you want from me? What do you want from me? What do you want from me? Rabbi Akiva, you think I could argue in Rabbi Akiva Eiger and halacha? Right? If Rabbi Akiva Eiger is mekel. Now in this case, it's not so much Rabbi Akiva Eiger is mekel. He has a suffix and does, but it held. It was a shiloh for the rabbanon. So now the shiloh is what's going on here. Nachalamaisis. So what's going on over here? Chayra is a raya brura. The raya brura from Talis and in Svara Rabbi Akiva Eiger is a pella. And this Abaisai is a shiloh that is very karev lalibi because I asked Rav Elyashiv a certain shiloh. And the answer I'm going to give you now, I heard from Rav Elyashiv, but I saw it in a sefer in Shvetz Yitzchak in the 15th parak, in the 15th parak, in the 164th page, Kuf Samach Daled, and the teretz I'm telling you, it says there. So now you have at least 2 people that heard from Rav Elyashiv what you're going to hear now. Rav Elyashiv said, of course, Rav Shach is right in the lumdus, and even Rabbi Akiva Eiger knows that. And Avada, I'm telling you, unbelievable thing now, Rabbi Say. Avada Rabbi Akiva Eiger agrees that the lumdus of Daita Lahachzir is borer, that it has to have a positive das to be returning it to the fire. And the problem of Daita Lahachzir is not that you have a das removal. Avada, you must have a positive das. And Adikadekach, very possible that we'll see. In the case of Rabbi Akiva Eiger will be right. But in the cases that we're talking about, it could be totally different. What's the pshat in Rabbi Akiva Eiger? Rabbi Akiva Eiger learned that the das that I put a cholent on Erev Shabbos, the balabas, I'm the balabas, and when I take my cholent and I put it on the fire Erev Shabbos, I put with it my das that I want this cholent to be on a fire. My das remains. My das remains. So in other words, when I put cholent on a fire in Erev Shabbos, that is the das of a bailim that I want it to be on a fire. So Avada, everyone agrees that the problem is you need a positive das to return it. What was Rabbi Akiva Eiger saying? Rabbi Akiva Eiger was talking about a very specific case. This guy, and Avada taka by talis, if it falls off, that's it. You have das until it fell. That's it. Up over here is a very specific case. When I have das, me the balabas to put on the cholent originally, my das remains. Comes along this fem dimension, this fellow comes, it does das to take it off. Now, my das is that it should remain on the fire. So Claire to Rabbi Kiva Eger, does my das, the balabas, that I wanted to remain on the fire, override the das of the person that removed it, whose das is not to put it back? Everyone agrees you need to have das to return. If you don't have das to return, there's nothing to discuss. That is the Tanai. Avada Rav Shach is right. But here I do have a das to return, because originally when I put it on the fire, I had a das that I wanted to remain on the fire. Now, if you, and Rabbi Kiva Eger agrees to that. So what's Rabbi Kiva Eger declaring? Declared to Rabbi Kiva Eger, if you hold, in this case, Adam Oyser Davar Sheina Shaloi, because with a Maisa, his das is Kaveya, then his das will override the other das. If you hold Ein Adam Oyser Davar Sheina Shaloi, even in this case, so then his das is batal. Berega his das is batal. What did we say? But we don't have a das to return. We do, because when he put on the chalent originally, that das was a das that it should remain on the fire. That's Rabbi Kiva Eger's clear. Avada Rabbi Kiva Eger agree you always need a positive das. But if I take the chalent and I put it on originally on Shabbos, I want it to remain on the fire. So if you come and take it off, so now if we say and I say your das is batal, so I remain with the das of the balabais that I want it to be constantly going back to the fire. If I hold Adam, in this case, so then his das will overpower the das of the balabas. What's the nafkamina? Sometimes this chakira sounds like, is the balcher under the hat? Is the hat over the balcher? Nafkamina is gevaldik. In our case of where the fire went out, so then b'kahai govna b'isai. So here, my das, you could say, was I wanted to remain on the fire. Which fire? This fire. The fire that I put it on. So if the fire went out on its own, let's say like the case of the Shabbos clock that it went out 11 p.m. by accident. So now in that case, here's the case where everyone will agree to. Bein Rebbe Kiva Eger, Bein Rav Shach, certainly everyone will agree. Everyone agrees a das la'achzir. Here you don't have the das la'achzir because I didn't know about it. And my original das was it should be on this fire. So this fire is gone. So I don't have a das to be machzir to a different fire. That fire you're not going to say. So this is not like the Aznibru. The Aznibru learned Rebbe Kiva Eger holds that das la'achzir means that das removal is the problem, but you don't need a positive das. So in our case, it would be mutter, because in our case, you don't have a positive das, but who cares? You don't have a das removal. The way that Rav Elyashiv is learning. How's the king learning, Rabbi Isai? He's learning that even Rabbi Kiva Eger agrees that you have to have a das lachzer. Just in the case of Rabbi Kiva Eger, you have a das lachzer. Because since you put it on the fire, that was a das that it should remain. Now the question is, whose das wins? The das of the balabayas or the das of this person doing it? If you say, so then his das won't shterzach my original das. But Mashenkin, in the case of where the fire went off on its own, so then the Kahai Govna, I have no das to positively return it. Because what are you going to say? The das that he originally put it on, that's not a das to return it. It's on this fire. This fire is gone. I said, I need a das lachzir. And therefore, Hilchos Talis is miyushiv. I hold for a minute for a shaila. What does the item say? But what's the mice in this case? Sorry?
Can you repeat the shaila?
Can I?
No, was he asking? Was the Rabbi asking us a shaila and a mitzvah?
No, I'm asking the other if there's any shailas in what I just said.
Yeah, no, everybody get it? So the Olam, the consensus of the Olam is that you cannot put it back on the fire.
Yeah, wait, we didn't say halacha l'maisi yet. First, we're saying the lumdis. Klape the lumdis, yes. Klape, what comes out in the lumdis, it should come out that in all these cases, you don't have
to be explained again. That's what that's. Is everybody with us here so far? Yes.
It should not be put back on the fire. According to what we're saying right now, it absolutely shouldn't be put back in the fire, and you can't blame Rebbe Kiva Eger, says Rav Elyashiv.
What was mevatel the shir rishayna?
What? I'm sorry, didn't understand.
What act was mevatel the shir rishayna? You should not be able to do. Chazara.
I don't need an act. I need a positive das to return it to the fire. So I don't have oida biyada and I don't have daita lachzor. So then now I'm missing those two t'nayim.
But what's the lumdis in a requiring a positive act if according to the lashon of the Rishonim, it's that you're being mevatel shehir Rishona.
But the shehir Rishona was nisbatel memela. Mali if I take it off the fire, mali if I take the fire away from it. But it's not a din in me doing something. It's a din that there has to be a bittul of the shehir Rishona. If you learn that daita la'achzir is a positive das returning it, so then the mitzias of the shehir being nisbatel requires now a positive das to return it, which I do not have.
That's the second fire.
You have to set the fire? What do you mean by that?
Fire. His fire was not on.
Oh. Yeah, so the shaila is, does it mean that because the person has to have a specific das for a specific fire?
So the fear of Eliyash, very good, and that's what I'm getting to now. The fear of Eliyash, he's going to say that Avada, even Rabbi Akiva Eiger agrees that you need daitel achzir. Here we said you have a daitel achzir for this fire, but you can't say that I have a daitel achzir for a different fire. That's a murder kapella. This whole thing is mechudesh. The whole idea over here is mechudesh. In other words, the machlekes Rav Shach and Rabbi Akiva Eiger is that Rav Shach is the pashtus. You need positive das to return, and you don't have it. Rav Eliashiv is being mechadesh, and Rabbi Akiva Eiger that even Rabbi Akiva Eiger requires a daitel achzir. But you can say if I say vite on the original fire, Kozman, I wanted that original fire to continue until 11 a.m. So then that's called I have a das that I want my das can leg to the das in the fire. But to go and say can leg to the das into an under the fire, that I'm going to say that I could take this das and put it into the next fire that's ready to vite. So therefore, we won't have the same kira.
Even if it's a blech on two fires on the same kira, even if it's the same, it's the same.
You get clear. Now the Oilam was talking Makavin right now to the Shmir Shabbos, which I wasn't going to mention, but I'll mention it. Because we'll see. It doesn't. We might have a different thing here. But the Shmir Shabbos in Aleph, if I'm not mistaken, Samach Tes. I didn't look it up before, but in Aleph Samach Tes, Rav Shlomo Zalman went to the next level with this chiddush. Rav Shlomo Zalman went with the same one. This is Rav Eliashiv. That daitel achzir, I can suge like I can leg to the das even in the fire beforehand, and he went all the way to the extent to say that therefore, even when the fire goes out on its own, let's say in my case of where, it wasn't plugged in or the hot plate went off by itself or the fire went off, in these cases, we say that your das, that it should be on a fire, remains. And that it's, again, the same type of idea that you need a positive das, but I have a positive das. I constantly have that positive das. So therefore, he went so far as to say that in my case of when the person knocked on my door at 11 at night, so then, you don't have a daitel achzir? You do. Why? Because his das is it should be on a fire. Now that is a very big chiddush, as you all understand. It's very mechudesh. Rav Eliashiv is already a level of a chiddush that you could put a fire das into a fire beforehand. Rav Shach is the simplest way. You have to have das lachzir, positive das lachzir. You can't put it in. You have to have it when you take it off. Rav Eliashiv is saying you could have it even before. And Rav Shlomo Zalman saying you could have it so much before that it could even be klape a different fire. Now, Baisai, in our case,
who says das chiyuvus on a second? Who says das chiyuvus and Rav Shach is for a specific fire? Maybe das chiyuvus is I should have a hot kadera, and therefore it's daiti lahaus or das chiyuvus putting it back wherever I want to put it back. What's the difference?
Because the whole thing is a murdik chiddush that I'm able to leg through the das, not at the time when I'm taking it off. In other words, we never saw such a thing.
I want it hot. I don't care which fire it's. I want it hot. I don't care which particular ash it comes from. It's daiti lahazir to keep my kadera hot.
Yeah, but where what's the lumdus that I showed my das? I showed my das by putting it on this fire. You're going to say he has a das for a different fire? That's a murdik chiddush.
I have a das for hot food. Okay, let's move it on.
Now, Baisai, to be makel just on this is not pashit. You see here, it's a shayla how to learn daitel lahachzir.
So we'll get to that in a second.
You see here, it's a shayla how to learn daitel lahachzir. It's not so pashit. These are all svaras, and even within Rebbe Akiva Eiger, it's not pashit. But you have to remember, Abayisai, in many of the cases that I'm speaking about, you always have the tziruf of the Ran. What's the tziruf of the Ran? Like we saw last time. The Ran held that anything that was on a fire as of when Shabbos came in, so then you don't need any of the tnoyim. You don't need any of the t'naya.
Okay.
So the Mela, let's go back to my case. 11 p.m. at night, he came to me. This thing was on the fire until 11 p.m. He came at 12 p.m. This thing was on the fire until 11. The Mishnah Berurah brings, and the Ramah says that, the minig is to be mekel toiv la'achmer. In this case, that we have the Ran, plus we have a svara that it might actually be called taita la'achzir. We do have Rosh Hashanah Zalman svara. So that, together with that, they could certainly be mekel. You can certainly mekel. I'll go to add another svara to the island, which is something that we have to talk about later. I have a hot plate. I don't have a blech. A hot plate, we're going to have to see, Mr. Shem, probably not today, probably next time. You have to see a hot plate. There's a ganze shaila. Why you're not allowed to put something cold straight on a hot plate or something that's already hot straight on a hot plate? Because it's definitely not a derech bishul, a hot plate. So then maybe it's like a radiator, which we're going to learn in Mr. Shem. That might not be a derech bishul b'chlal. So that might also be a tziruf. But again, these are all tzirufim. The ikar is the lumbus of what's called daita lahachzir. Now, by say with this, I want to be messiah with a gishmak shayla. So kloimar, what came out? It comes out that, let's say the case is, I forgot to plug in. It happens, Rabbi say. You take the boiling hot food. I do this every Friday. We take the boiling hot food from the fire, and then we put it onto the hot plate. But you take it off the fire and you put it onto the hot plate. What happens? I took my boiling hot food and I put it on the hot plate, but I just forgot to plug it in. So now we don't have the ran. Now we don't have the tier for the ran. And I also don't have oida biyadai. So now I come, let's say if I come ben hashmashis, no, so ben hashmashis, maybe you get a guy, maybe you get a guy to plug in even the hot plate. Obviously, if the food isn't cooked, you might have visual hakum problems. But if it's ben hashmashis, I could probably even take it if I wasn't the Kabul Shabbos and take it to the neighbor. Okay. But let's say you chop this, everybody say, an hour into Shabbos, but the food is still hot, which could be, it could be, the food is still hot. And it's past the time where I don't have the terim of ben hashmashis, let's say, or I don't have goyim, or whatever the case is. So now we lost the ran, because as of when Shabbos came in, it wasn't on a fire. I also don't have oida biyadai. So now, how did you learn daita la'achzir? If you're going to learn like Rav Elyashiv, this is not called daita la'achzir, and I don't have the ran, and I don't have oida biyadai, because this is not called daita la'achzir. I don't have das that it should be on a different fire. The fee that goyim Rosh Hashanah Zalman, maybe you could declare that when I put it there, I was showing I wanted to be on a fire. On a fire. You should know, even Rosh Hashanah Zalman is a big pella in that case. To say Rosh Hashanah Zalman would say it in that case is a big pella, because Bishlam, if he put it onto a fire and the fire went out, so then I see his das. But if he put it onto a place and there was no fire and he thought there was a fire, so then we don't see any das to be on a fire. He's a shlemazel, it's not his fault, but you can't say he has a das. You can't say it has a das lachzir to a fire when we don't even see it that it was on a fire. So I would be very, very nervous in that case. Like I said before, maybe on a hot plate, there might be some other tziruf that we'll talk about. And certainly, if you could do it on a ketera, a big ketera, even on an upside down bekel, which we'll talk about probably next time. So then that would be the eitzah. That's what Rabbi said, part one. But let me be messiah with a gishmak shayla, which now, based on what the oidim learned to love this, you're going to love the shayla. Came a yid to my house. He was a bacher and he wants to help out. He wants to help his Rebbe, his Rebbitzin. So he says, I'll get it. I'll go get the soup. So there's me and the Rebbitzin. We're okay with that. He went to the hot plate and he took off the soup. And then he comes to the table and what's the soup? Cholent. So he took off the wrong one. So here he is. He went and he took off the wrong one. So here we have, let's say we can make it extreme if you want. We can make it that it's not even oida biyada. Let's say you put it on the table. Let's say. So now I don't have daita la'achzir. I don't have daita la'achzir. So this Rabbi say, before we done it, klape our sugya, klape our the poiskin that we said. So okay, you also have the ran over here. Obviously, it's a much easier case because you have the ran. But let's down the londis. Come to gain the das Torah, the bejana, and he's talking Hilchos Tzitzis in Ches Yud Aleph. The das Torah, the bejana, he says, look, in Tzitzis, there's a similar case. What's the case of in Tzitzis? It's talking about a fellow, it's on Rosh Chodesh. This happens sometimes, Rabbi say. Sometimes the person is in the mood, and and he starts taking his tefillin, he's wrapping up his tefillin, and now he's supposed to be wrapping up his tefillin and not his talis. He's wrapping up the tefillin, doesn't realize, and he just takes off the talis. So now, said the Das Torah, what's the din? He realizes all of a sudden they clap for Mosif, and he goes over, and he's looking around, and he has to go put back on his talis. Now, he took off his talis, and he was in the mode of taking it off and putting it away. Says the Das Torah, does he make another bracha? Said the Das Torah, the Bijana, what's the Shaila? The Shaila is this is called a Das B'toyis, which is somewhat our case. A Das B'toyis. What's the din of a Das B'toyis? Can I just be Mavatal your Das and say your Das is garnished? Here too, by the talis, do I say your Das is Toyis? And therefore, when it comes to the original bracha of my talis, we'll say it continues because he took it off to be off. That if you be'emes take it off to be off, then Avadi you need a new bracha. But over here he had no das. So do we say it's a das b'toyis, and therefore your das is batal? Or do we say highness is command, lav command dummy? You didn't actually have a positive das, the same type of shayla. Maybe I need a positive das to put it back. Or do we say no? We mevatel your das and we remain with what we had originally. So the das Torah, which you could be Ma'irich on, I won't be Ma'irich on now. He brings the Magen Avram in Simon Kuf Tzadi Siv Gimel, which has a similar case where within a case, within a case, within a case. We're going to get back to the Chalent in a minute. But he has a case of a talis, which he wants to bring a raya from the case of the talis from a Magen Avram and Hilchos Brachas. The Magen Avram and Brachas is a big chiddush. Now, we don't pass in this Magen Avram, the Mishabur at least doesn't. But in the Lumdis, there's other reasons why we might not. And certainly the Das Torah gave a lot of credence to this Magen Avram. We know that when you make a bracha achrona, it's a cancel button. So a person, let's say he makes a bracha hamazon and he wants to continue drinking, you got to make a new bracha. We know that because we go with the Mishnah Berurah. Bracha achrona is a cancel button, new bracha. That's the Mishnah Berurah. The Magen Avram had a different shita. The Magen Avram has a shita that what happens if I plan on continuing drinking afterward. So Magen Avram learns that a bracha achrona is not a cancel button. That's not our sugya. We'll talk about that under more. Okay, but comes along the Magen Avram and he says, "L'meila lefi me." Watch this case. I benched, and I didn't realize that I'm still going to drink. What's the case? It's very complicated in Hilchos Brachas. It's big fights, but let's just make it simply that there's a big arichas. But let's just make it that the guy plans on still drinking. If he would plan on still drinking, he wouldn't have to make another bracha. What happened, says the Magen Avram, that I didn't know there's more to drink. or a different type of case of where I didn't realize I was still going to drink. I betoyis made a bracha achrona. I still wanted to drink. Says the Magen Avram, then you don't make a new bracha rishayna. Because that das is betoyis. And since that das is betoyis, and the Magen Avram doesn't hold the bracha achrona as a cancel button, but since that das is betoyis, we don't see a das of stopping to drink as a das. It's a das betoyis. So therefore, you don't make a new bracha on the drink. That's the Magen Avram. Comes along, the das Torah says, so das betoyis is not a das. So the male in my case of the talis, says the Magen Avram, the das Torah, I took off my talis, the das betoyis, so that das is not a das. So the male, the bracha should continue. Says the das Torah, but yesh l'chalik. There's a difference between brachas and talis. He says, by a talis, you need something positive, like a daitolahachzir kivyachol. You need something positive to enable the bracha to continue. Because once you've taken it off, you've broken yourself off from the original bracha. He says, when it comes to Hilchos Brachas, there it's the opposite. The bracha continues unless you have a positive das to not drink. He says, but Masharenking, when it comes to the talis, anytime I take off a talis, you need a new bracha, unless you have a positive das to be putting it back on. Kloimar, you need to make a hemshech. You need a daitay lahachzir. So he says, it's very sad that you didn't make a bracha. It's not your fault. It's very sad that you took off the talis by mistake, but you have nothing positive taking you back to the talis. That's the das Torah says. But now we come back to our case. So he just told us that if I need a das lehachzir, which we established that even Rebbe Akiva Eiger, certainly Rav Shach and Rabbi Yasher says even Rebbe Akiva Eiger requires a das lehachzir. So if I'm going to need a das lahachzir, you come to our case of the cholent that he took off. It's a das betoyis that he removed it But who cares? Here, you're right. It's a das betoyis, and it's not a das. His das is not a das. But who cares? I need a das lax here to be putting it back. So in my case of the challenge, there would be a makom to be machmir. We have Kallus because the ram, but there would be a makom to be machmir because you don't have a positive das to return it. But Rabbi say, if the oilim is cheshbening, gewaldig, this is mamish the case of Rebbe Kiva Eger. Because over here, Bishlamov, it would have been my wife or myself that took off the chalent. So then you could say it's a das b'toyis. Das b'toyis is not a das la'achzir. So oinus is lav command of it. I feel bad for you. And the das toyis is telling us that whenever I need a das la'achzir, that's not the toyis. It's not going to be a positive das. The toyis just makes it that I don't reckon with the toyis. But if I need something positive, I don't have something positive bringing me back. So Bishlam, if it would have been me and my wife that took it off, so then saif, I don't have the das to return it. But what did Rebbe Kiva Eger say? He said over here it was a bacher that took it off. So now we'll clear mamish Rebbe Kiva Eger. Over here it's ein adam oiser davar sheina shalai. So over here, do we say when someone does a maisa, this is the case of Rebbe Kiva Eger? Do we say ein adam oiser davar sheina shalai? So in this case, if we'll say ein adam oiser davar sheina shalai, then my das will be able to overpower his das, because my das that it was on the fire will be the das which brings it back to the fire. If you learn like those Rishonim that we say here, Adam Oiser Davar Shein Shaloi, because he did a Maisa, so then my das is going to lose, and in this case there'd be a makim to be machmir on the challenge. Kamuvan in this case, since you have the Ran, and according to Rebbe Kiva Eger, we have it sad to say it's Ein Adam Oiser Davar Shein Shaloi. As a male, you can return the challenge to the fire. So let's make a sikkum. One thing we see is that halacha is certainly filled with lomdis, gewaldig. Second of all, we see that the Goyin Rebbe Kiva Eger had a chiddush that when it comes to the sugya of Adam Eiser Davar Sheina Shaloi, Ein Adam Eiser Shaloi, so it's possible to say, and that's mamish the case we spoke about, that since he did a Maisa, we'll say over here, Taka, Ein Adam Eiser Davar Sheina Shaloi, even with a Maisa. We saw from there that it's a raya, that the lumdis of the t'nai of Daita La'achzir is that you have to, that you have a das removal is already enough, and that Rashak said is not mistaber. So we saw the chiddush of Rebbe Yashiv that no, everyone agrees you need a positive das to return. But if I leg through the das in the fire beforehand, then that's called Daita La'achzir. Now the Shaila of Eino the Moses David Shalom will say, does his das knock yours out? Or we say, Eino the Moiser, so your das could remain. Rav Shlomo Zalman went even further. He said if it would happen, you would even be able to take it to a different fire. But this Rabbi side, come you have the Ran, you could be Makel. But without the Ran, very schwer to be Makel.
The questions from the floor here and on the chat, I see, what about fires going out? Happens a lot. Electrical disruptions. Under what case, and you took it off, can you put it back?
That's great, because in that case, he for sure has daitoi lachs, and once he sees it, he's zikr as das that he wants to, if he's seeing it happening, he's definitely going to have das to keep putting it onto a different fire.
No, but he didn't, he took it off because the fire was off. Had the fire stayed on, he never would have certainly been daita lahav.
Wait, what was the case? I thought you said he sees the fire going off, then the fire went off?
What was he? A blackout. A blackout. A blackout.
There's a blackout. So you have to know, first of all, in a blackout, you have to know that if he knows what's happening, if he's sleeping, then it's the exact same sugya. If he's not sleeping and he knows what's happening, so first of all, usually the hot plate is still boiling hot. So that might still be called an H once you chop it. And then that second, he would have das that he wants to go and put it somewhere else. Or he has das that when it's going to come back on, he's going to want it to remain.
The blackout usually means everybody's hot plate is off. So do you have das? Is it intrinsic in your thing that you have das that you, when it comes on, it should still be there, and therefore it's an inherent?
I could definitely hear that. I could definitely hear that. You have to remember, there's a whole other shaila in a blackout. And sometimes it goes out for a long time, and then it got cold, and then recooking. And don't forget in Eretz Yisrael what a blackout is. Fragnished.
That happened here in Lakewood a few years ago. and the Rabbanim were busy with this all Shabbos. There was a
right. Lakewood is more of a problem because Lakewood is predominantly Jewish. Right. So Mamela, the Goyim are doing it for the Jews. Bishlama in New York. So you could say maybe not.
Yeah. And what about a Mishareses, a Goy? Does it make any difference?
What's exactly the Shaila?
She took the pot off by mistake.
So that'll be the same Shaila. Ve'ino the Moisa Davar Sheina Shalai.
Even a Goy.
Yeah.
Even though there's no machshava with a Goy, b'chlal, l'chayra, kuf. Or if the kuf is
but she definitely she might not have the shmaz, but she certainly has das.
And what if it fell off?
So if it fell off, the fee what we're saying today, that l'chayra yesh ladin, if you would have Rabbi Yashiv's svara that your das is that it should be on the fire. That I'm not sure about. You should know. And that's a very good shaila. I'm not sure. You look at the Shvitz Yitzchak, he says one way. I'm not so sure because you could have heard that the whole svara of Yashiv that's called Daita La'achzir is because it's on the fire and it's where he wanted it. But once it's not, then you can't say he wanted it to. It's like the case of the falling talus. So I would have thought that it is a problem. That's what I would have thought.
One last shaila. This is a little bit slightly different track, but Daita Lahazir, is that a dimidin tonight? You don't have to explicate it, right? It's all b'machshava. Can I say right now, Hareini Mechavin, at 130, I'm always Daita Lahazir, and therefore I never have any problem with Shabbos? Or is it totally in each shehiyah separately?
So,
it's like a Tarsudarim, I can make a masjid tonight, every Rosh Hashanah. I want to put my chom back every Shabbos. Is it such a shayach, such a zach?
I mean, it's very difficult to say that because, it's yeah. I find that we're dealing with mechsis. We're dealing with a mechsi mevashel. So I do think there's a requirement of some level of positive necessity of thinking so that he himself doesn't feel like he's cooking. So if he remembers that tonight is what to talk about. That comment that it's something that happened many years ago and he thought of it tonight that, for the rest of my life, then you're not going to get rid of the mechsi. That tonight works in things that I don't need to necessarily have something positive. But here you have a tsura that you're trying to avoid, a tsura of a mechsi k'mevashel. So I'd be nervous.
Yeah. I don't know, can you make it tonight of the Avnei Nezer now for the rest of my life? I'm never going to have a problem with Dafik Kaiman before Chatzais. Can I do that now and make it tonight like Kal Hagba?
Maybe. The what I just said, maybe. The only stand Valbatish, it could be you can't for a different reason. Because since it's not an everyday thing, we wouldn't falazach of it. The Bishlam of the Eshel Avram, the Buchachas tonight, that's an everyday thing. The Kavan of the Shem Hashem and all that stuff. But Mashen Kain, something that's a once a year thing. It's Shvetz Gleiben as a Kamachan at Tonight for Azach, was Kimp noch no ein Malayar.
Okay, Esher Chayk, Rav, you were with us today.